Vietnam skulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast, So There I Was. This is episode number 159. Tracer fire. I took that personally.
He sort of took that personally. I wonder why. People shooting at you? It's not personal. It's just business.
It hurt his feelings. That's kind of I never really thought of it like that, but it hurt his feelings that people were mad at him.
Yeah. It took it personally that people were trying to kill him. I guess that is sort of personal, Yeah,
it is. It's very personal, and I love the way he explained. He explained that. Well, what a great interview. What a fantastic patriot and a gem that we finally got his stories recorded, because he is another Vietnam veteran helicopter pilot.
He is. He was, and he is. Yeah. What a wonderful man. His call sign was what, Fig?
Apache 2-3.
Apache 2-3. So that was great. And a kind of a neat segue into this is this week we've got a new tanker aircraft commander, Nick Shockley. He donated $200 to us at sotherewas.us/Patreon. And it's in honor of Captain George M. Shockley, United States Army, who received a DFC, Distinguished Flying Cross, a Bronze Star, an Army Commendation Medal for Heroism with V device, V is for Valor, an Air Medal with V device. There aren't many AE pilots left from his era. Sure would love to hear from a Mohawk or guardrail pilot on the show. So if you know of one or are one, please reach out to us at repeat@sotherewas.us or fig@sotherewas.us, and we will get you on the show, preserve some of your cool tales, and he's going to try and get us some names as well. Nick says, hey, I started listening to your show in July of 2022 when my dad died from MDS blood cancer caused by Agent Orange. He is my hero. He was a Cobra driver in Vietnam and spent the next 20 years flying aerial exploitation in the Army. It's just the pilot talk from our show makes him feel like his dad is still here with him. So, Nick, we are humbled and honored by your donation, and we're humbled and honored by your dad's sacrifices to serve our nation. And that's tough. We know you lost your pop, and thank you for sharing some of his story with us. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
The show's sponsor this week remains HSI Wealth Strategies. Hey, folks, don't be a moron.
Call Robbie.
Call Robbie.
Come on. Call Robbie.
Reach out to him via email, robert.walling@nm, that's NovemberMike.com. robert.walling@novembermike.com. Let's talk a little bit more about John Haugen, Apache 23. What a fun show.
Yeah. It starts with, the draft. Turn left, go to Vietnam, turn right, go to OCS.
Right.
Or actually, turn left, be enlisted, turn right, go to officer candidate school.
Right. And he was done with college. So he said he took the 5-year plan to get through school. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And then, his process through that part of his life was actually very entertaining. And then he kind of stumbled into aviation, which I didn't see that coming. I thought he knew what he wanted to do. It wasn't really clear to me how right. He just stumbled into it.
It wasn't his plan. He stumbled into it, and it was good. And he talks about one of the best stories, I thought, from flight training was 1 mile from litter barrel.
Yeah.
Not going to spoil it.
In the Lawton Debs.
The Lawton Debs, yep. The debutantes from Lawton, Oklahoma. He was down there at Fort, I think it was Fort Walters, yeah. WOLTERS, no longer there, but it was near Wichita Falls, Texas, not far from Lawton, Oklahoma.
And it was that also where the Crow's Black Book?
I think it was.
Was that way? Which is also another funny story.
Yeah, they found a little black book, and they don't know if it was left on purpose or if someone really screwed up and left their black book behind, but it worked out well for them.
Oh, my gosh. And then, just the stories of flying in combat. He doesn't really he doesn't really say the words being shot down. It's very it's different, right?
It's much different. Yeah, he doesn't like to say he was shot down.
Well, actually, he never really was this. All of his.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, in that sense, he didn't get blasted out of the sky.
Yeah, he didn't come. he didn't come down in pieces. It was always in one piece, and most of the time flyable again.
Right. But multiple times, and he's very eloquent about it. It's a fun listen. So yeah, I think we ought to get out of the way and have that fun listen, shall we?
Well, yeah, you're going to like this.
You sure are. Here comes Apache 23. Don't sit on that collective.
This is a true story about crossing the pond at night in the world's smallest cockpit on the tanker through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fun.
So there I was. It was June 1968. I'm standing in a hallway. I'd been drafted, just passed my physical. Looked to the right, I could go down the hall and be inducted into the Army. Looked to the left, I could go down the hall and enlist for OCS. Became Army aviator, flew 900 hours of combat. That's the rest of the story.
Fantastic. And I can tell you there's some great aviation tales beginning just like that today. Greetings, everyone. Repeat here, coming to you from Pensacola, Florida. Where's my co-host?
Hey, I'm in God's country, also known as Kearney, Missouri. Excuse me, I'm slightly under the weather. Thank you to my bride. Yeah, and it is our pleasure to welcome John Apache 23 Haugen to our show.
Thanks, guys. Good to be here.
Wonderful to have you. How is it you came to be standing in that passageway, John? Deciding whether or not to enlist, and then do what? Go fly airplanes in the Army. Cool.
Well, I had been drafted. I took 5 years to get through college, and I'd been drafted in May, and they were going to induct me before I could graduate. So I was able to play a little game with them. I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I'm from La Crosse, Wisconsin, so I was eligible to go to Minneapolis to get my physical. They wanted to send me to Milwaukee, and I used that time to graduate. And, then they did draft me, and that's how I got to that hallway. It was a pretty common thing to happen. Most of the guys I was in basic and AIT with who'd gone to college had been drafted at that point.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's kick in the head or jelly donut. That's what I'm hearing. Kick in the head, jelly donut.
Yeah.
You took the jelly donut, which was OCS.
Yeah, I had to go to basic, and basic was kind of fun. The big remembrance I have of it is that on my first payday, they paid in cash in those days. The drill sergeant put down 4 $20 bills. I didn't know what I was going to be paid in the Army. I just knew I was in the Army and I was going to have to do all the things Army people did. Then he took one of those $20 bills back and said he was going to put it in a savings bond for me. Now, I've never seen that savings bond, but I had $60 to last me the rest of the month.
Oh.
So
it's got to be worth millions now, John. Go ask the Army for it.
I know. I tried to locate that thing, but it's been 53 years or so.
Right?
Yeah. It was cash, and he told you he was going to take care of that for you. Interesting.
Yeah. I've thought about it since then, but I didn't feel like I was in a position to question him,
Right. Hey, where was that? Where was that? Where were you physically located for OCS?
This was, if we're talking about, did you say OCS or?
Yeah.
Wait,
this is basic. You had to go through basic training first.
I was in Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Okay.
And I got a little side story about the last one about this. A friend of mine I went to college with was in Teaneck, New Jersey. And we had communicated, and he said, if they ever let you off the post, let me know, and we'll go and have some fun in downtown Manhattan. So I did get a weekend off, and I got myself a round-trip bus ticket up there. I had my $60 in my pocket, and Billy said we're going to stay at his parents' house. Now, I didn't really have any clothes to speak of, so I had to wear his clothes, but I did have my Army-issue shoes. Didn't have any hair. I think I had, a little more hair than I have now, but not much. And so he took me to a disco in downtown Manhattan, where it had that big ball with little chunks of mirror on it spinning around.
Sure.
Found myself a girl there, ordered a drink, and they came back, gave him a $20 bill, and he gave me $5 back. And I said, well, there must be some kind of a mistake here. I gave you $20. Turns out drinks were $7.50. This is in 1978. And I thought, man, I don't know what happened, but, I still had a little of my 60 left. So I decided no more drinks for me that night.
Yeah, right. Man, that's like today, that's got to be like $40-$50 a drink.
I know. But, it was kind of shocking. I tried not to let on, but I just knew that I probably wasn't going to get lucky that night.
You were going to be lucky to get out with your $45, it sounds like. But
I don't think I did. But I had a great time, and it was nice getting off the base and doing that.
Nice.
So anyway, I went on from there. I spent some time in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and that was AIT, Advanced Individual Training Infantry. And at Fort Polk, it was called Tigerland, and they made a movie out of it, 2000. And that's what it was like. Ran into a little something there. I'm just telling you some of these things because this is kind of what the Army was like in those days. A judge had sent some soldiers up there, or gave some guys a choice. They were gang members in Chicago, and you could either enlist in the Army or go to jail. And so they decided to enlist in the Army, and that's when I ran into them in Fort Polk. And we got in a little bit of a scuffle. And
wait a minute, they weren't automatically upstanding citizens?
No, they weren't. It wasn't a big deal.
Go figure.
We went on a hike at a candy bar. He wanted it. I said no. And we had a little scuffle. But after that, myself and the college boys never left our barracks alone. So our war started early, let's say.
It was a different, you're talking about a different kind of situation here.
Yeah, it was a different Army in those days. And then I went on to officer candidate school, and we got pretty lucky there. Infantry officer candidate school. One of my friends that I ran into there, a fellow by the name of Wayne, had graduated from Texas A&M, and he was in the Corps at A&M, which means the Corps at A&M was like going to West Point if you were in the Corps.
Right.
And so he'd been hazed and all this kind of stuff they do in OCS, and he would give us coaching on this is what they're going to do and this is what they're going to do next. And that was really helpful to us because, one of the things he told us is they think an Army officer never gets cold, never gets tired, never gets hungry. So what you can expect is to get cold, tired, and hungry most of the time. And so anyway, we went all through it. I had one incident where, a lot of times TAC officers just do whatever they please. And so we were going to finally get off the base for a weekend. And the TAC officer said, I did something, I messed up, and he was going to keep me. Wayne said, this is going to be your test. This guy's going to try to break you. And so what you want to remember, this is a Friday. He said, what you want to remember is he's got a date tonight. It's probably at 5:36. He's going to have to let up because he has to go home and shower, take his date out. So I was marching back and forth with my M14 rifle and dropping for push-ups and doing all that stuff. And I had a watch and I snuck a look at it. And I said, this is only going to last for another half hour or so. Sure enough, it was raining. It was miserable. About 5:30, called me a few names, told me I was miserable and terrible. And that was it. So that's my story about OC.
Okay.
No, one other quick story. I was sitting in a class, and this is an important one. Somebody came into the class and says, anybody want to volunteer to fly helicopters? I raised my hand and said yes. And that's how I ended up getting into aviation.
Interesting. What to me, I just assumed that if you check left, go to OCS, that meant flying helicopters. I wasn't even thinking infantry officer until you just brought that up.
No,
right?
OCS was infantry OCS. And probably I don't know, at least 90% of the guys became small unit leaders, over in Vietnam. Platoon leaders are, leading on ambushes and patrolling, that kind of thing. So if that's another thing, we went to flight school. If we dropped out of flight school, we're going right over to Vietnam as a small unit leader, leading infantry.
So there's a little motivation there, not to drop
out of
flight school.
Yeah.
So did you do the entire infantry officer course and then go to flight school?
Right.
Yeah, so you graduated from infantry officer course, went to flight school with that hanging over your head. You fuck this up, guess where you're going?
Yeah.
No pressure there, John.
I know.
No pressure.
That's kind of what it was like. And in OCS, went to flight school. I had a short stop at Fort Sill, Oklahoma before that. And there, my assignment was to be the safety officer and the executive officer of an artillery battery. And
I was going to say, that's Kanakaker School there, right?
It was Kanakaker School. And so I took that on. They gave me a chief of smoke. Now, I know in the Marine Corps, you've got a name for an E7 who's kind of at the top of his,
that's a gunnery sergeant.
Gunnery sergeant. Okay. Well, in artillery, they're called chief of smoke. A gunnery sergeant is chief of smoke.
Okay.
And so they gave my boss, Larry, gave me a chief of smoke to train me up for the exec test and the safety test. Passed them, took the battery to the field, and we were out there firing the guns, and a staff car pulled up. The guy got out, it was colonel, and I reported to him. And we started talking. It turned out he was the commander of all the training, artillery training at Fort Sill. And so we're chatting, and he looks at my collar. In the Army, you wear your rank on your right side and your branch on the left side. And he looks at my collar, and he says, "Are those idiot sticks?" I said, "Yes, sir." That's what they called infantry, the cross rifles. And so anyway, we had a good little chat, and then he went away. As it turned out, there were maybe 15 of us who went from infantry OCS to Fort Sill. They put us there because it was close to Fort Walters, Texas, which is where we started primary. And I was the only one that got assigned to an artillery job. The other guys were like recreation officer and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And so anyway, I got a letter of commendation from this guy, and it went through my boss's boss and my boss. And after that, I was just golden at Fort Sill. Had a great time there. Then I moved on to primary flight at Fort Walters, Texas.
Okay.
So you could have been recreation officer or the rifle range safety officer, but you actually got maybe a little something out of it after all.
Really did. It was helpful in flying because in artillery, you have to think in 360 degrees. You're going to fire these cannons somewhere, and you better be sure where you're going to fire them. Went down to Fort Walters, Texas. I might tell one more story about Fort Sill.
Oh,
I was staying in the BOQ, Bachelor Officer Quarters, and I was with there were two bedrooms, and one was a guy who was making a career out of being an artillery officer, and then there was me. And I was there for about a day, and I looked over on a ledge, and there was a little black book there. So I asked him if it was his. He said it wasn't. And I looked in it, and there were the names of women and telephone numbers of women. And I thought, I wonder if this maybe is what I think it is. And it was said the Hawk. It was apparently this book was put together by the Hawk. And so I called one of the women and I said, I'm a friend of the Hawk, and I just like to, I'm new in town and would like to possibly have a cup of coffee with you and, just kind of get to know my way around. And I had a couple of friends at Fort Sill that I played tennis with. And, after I found out what this was, they wanted in, of course. And so they called a couple of girls. We were able to put together kind of a composite of the Hawk so that we could sound like we were friends of him. And we were just cold. I don't know if you saw Officer and a Gentleman, that movie. That's a pretty good aviation movie. So these were the Lawton Debs that we found, and just had a wonderful time with them.
Lawton, Oklahoma. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Pretty
so
lucky.
Was that a passed down log that whoever was in that room before left?
I don't know if it was, but to your point, Bruce, called him Bucky, one of my tennis players, wanted that book when I left, when I went to Fort Walters. And I said, okay, Bucky, here's the way it's going to work. I'm going to give you the book, and down the road, I'm going to need a favor, and you're going to give it to me, okay? So later on, much later on, now I'm on R&R in Australia, and somehow Bucky and Ken, these two guys, were there in Australia. And that's a whole other story, but I said, Bucky, now's the time, because he had been to Hong Kong, and I was going to go to Hong Kong on R&R. I was in Australia in R&R, and I said, Bucky, I need to get hooked up in Hong Kong. And so that's how you repay this thing. And so he gave me a number of a Cathay airline stewardess in Hong Kong. And so I contacted her. Unfortunately, when I contacted her, she was living at home, and I got her father. And so that didn't work out for me. Anyway, we paid his debts.
That's great. That is a great story.
Oh, fantastic.
Tell me this, Gut. Was that book left there intentionally, or do you think it was somebody left it in a hurry and forgot it was there?
I just don't know. I mean, he didn't give any direction on who he was or anything like that, and I think he might have just left it there. The other guy in the other bedroom didn't want any part of it, so I just put it to good use and gave it to Bucky, and I'm not sure what he did with it after that, but he probably brought a few friends in, and
that's great.
So it was
the hawk.
Yeah.
If you go to these bases and you're only going to be there 5 months, it's pretty tough to meet people.
Well, sure it
you
is.
Need a black book.
Well, yeah, you need to know some tribal knowledge. Some of them, and there it was. That was awesome. Mm-hmm. So how far away from Lawton, Oklahoma was where you went for primary?
It was maybe an hour and a half. Fort Walters is in Mineral Wells, Texas, and it's not too far from the border. Maybe it was a couple-hour drive. It was pretty close.
Okay. Fort Walters, Texas. So does this still exist? Is Fort Walters still a base? Because
I think it is.
Okay. Is it so? You know where Laredo is? Not Laredo. I'm sorry.
Wichita.
Lofton Air Force Base in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Is it Lofton? Am I saying that wrong?
No, I don't.
Laughlin.
Yeah, we're Fort Walters is about an hour and a half west of Dallas. Okay. And there's a town called Weatherford in between. And, it's actually, Fort Worth is, kind of on the way.
So, according to Wikipedia, Fort Walters, Texas was a United States military installation. So, it appears to be in the former camp. The former camp, as it were.
Yeah, I think they still have a museum there. It's sort of an Army aviation.
I think I just saw that, but I closed out my search page.
Yeah, when we were there, one of the things we did at Fort Walters was a bunch of us got together and we decided that, we were commissioned officers, and Fort Walters trained on one side of it, trained warrant officers, and they had to go through what was sort of a short-term like OCS and flight training. That was their routine. We were commissioned officers, so we didn't have to do any of that, and we got weekends off. And we were also, now a second lieutenant made $411 a month in those days. And we went to flight school on TDY. So we got $1,250 non-taxable TDY pay.
Holy
in flight school, one of the things we did.
So 3 times your base pay in TDY?
TDY, yeah, that's what we got. Oh, we had flight pay.
That's temporary duty, folks. TDY, temporary duty. Nice.
So we also had flight pay. That was $125. So it was like just becoming rich all of a sudden. Some of the guys went out and bought Corvettes and things like that. I bought kind of the Datsun that preceded the 740 or the Z car. Is it 40Z? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I should have bought that one, but I didn't. I bought the one before the Fair Lady. And what we did with some of our money is we went down by Love Field and we rented an apartment. And the apartment, the critical variable on the apartment is how many flight attendants live in this area. And it was near Love Field, and there were quite a few. So we'd go down on weekends to this apartment, and we just have cookouts and just have a ball. And that made, flight school a little bit easier at Fort Walters.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, yeah.
Fantastic.
And, hey, Ujala, are they still paying you in cash?
No, they didn't pay in cash.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think we got paid in cash there. I'm not sure how it got paid, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, so how did primary flight training go for you? And what kind of aircraft were you flying?
I was flying the OH-23, which is a Hiller, and it's a reciprocating engine. And it's the same kind of aircraft that you would have seen if you watched MASH.
Yeah.
That's,
okay.
Looked just like that.
The OH-23 was Raven.
OH-23 Raven. And it was a good aircraft. It was challenging to fly because of a reciprocating engine. And in a helicopter, you had to control the throttle, you had to control the pedals, you had to control the cyclic, any change there, and also the trim, little Chinese hat on top of it. Any change you made, you had to make control changes in all those areas. And so it was kind of challenging. One of the things that happened to us in primary flight was the Army, the Department of the Army, made a policy change. And they said to our flight school, you have to cut one guy off each stick. And a stick had 3 pilots on it and an instructor. And so, they announced that. This is what we're going to do.
Well, when you say cut, you mean like we're going to do a reduction in force and they're going to go to the infantry type thing?
They're going to go wherever they go. Yeah, they're going to go wherever they go. In my case, it would have been infantry. But my stick had a guy named Frank who was the best pilot in the class. Okay, everybody knew it, and he was the best pilot in class.
Oh, boy.
And the other guy on the stick was a guy who'd been to Vietnam. He was a captain. I was a second lieutenant, and he was going to make a career out of the Army. It was obvious he was an Army guy that was going to be a career.
And I'm guessing the instructor wasn't up for being cut.
Well, I said, I had studied pretty hard, and I continued to, and I said, man, this is going to be like really tough to be the guy that survives here. It's going to be me or the captain. And it was me. I don't know why, but, I made it through that. And then,
good on you. Whoa. No unforced errors, man. That's well done.
No unforced errors there. I've spent nights looking at 8-track tapes of how to do the normal approach and, the traffic pattern and all that kind of stuff. I figured this is all I got. And I put one of those, you guys might have done this too, where you put the instrument panel up in the bathroom, right in front of the commode.
Cobra Tiger.
You just watch, you just give yourself that 24 hours a day if you can.
Baby. Yeah, the chair flying.
That's
that goes back to some, lots of people have, but most recently it was Quinny giving us that advice. Is, you know what? You don't give up. Don't quit. Don't find an excuse to get yourself washed out.
Yep. They will tell you when you have to go. And until then, you have to stay.
Yep, never quit. So that's awesome. That shows you wanted it, and fantastic.
Yeah.
So because I have to ask this because you were flying helos. Any close calls, emergencies, bent metal in flight school?
Well, not in primary flight. Okay. The story is going to tell about. We trained with Vietnamese pilots too, And so sometimes we were in the same airspace with them. And that was a little bit hairy. You had to kind of look out for them. They weren't going to look out for you too much. And one day I was overhearing a radio call by a Vietnamese pilot, and he was lost. So not saying they were bad pilots, but, these are people who probably the most mechanical thing they ever had was a bicycle, maybe. And then they came over to flight school. And I think they did pretty well with, what they had to do. But anyway, he calls in and the tower says, where are you? Get down, a little lower and try to read a street sign or a road sign or something. So the guy went down, and a little while later he calls, I am 1 mile from Litter Barrel. And in Texas, they have signs, saying there's a litter barrel in 1 mile. And so he got one of those. Man. He said, I'm 1 mile from Litter Barrel.
I'm 1 mile from Little Barrel.
But that's kind of how that went. Anyway.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
We may have a show title there, 1 mile from Litter Barrel.
Yeah, there was, the problem.
Opted so far, but wow.
So anyway, that's,
man.
We navigated by the holidays and the swimming pool and all that other stuff.
Sure.
Wait.
Now, did they have you go through a primary and advanced in flight training? How did that work? Okay.
Yeah, what we did was after primary, we all got together. We were the orange hat. Each class had a different colored hat. And what you'd do when you were leaving Fort Walters is you'd throw your hat out on the lawn. And typically the new guys were coming in. And that was kind of cool to see. These guys are all done with primary. They're going down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which was by Enterprise, Alabama. And that's where we did advanced. We learned, what we learned in primary was how to fly the helicopter, how to land to a pinnacle, how to do an auto rotation, and, just a little bit of navigation and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then down at Fort Rucker, we flew the OH-13, which had instruments in it. And then we graduated to a Huey after that. So at Fort Rucker, we got what you'd call a special instrument ticket. It wasn't a standard instrument ticket because we didn't have all the instruments, like glide slopes and all those kinds of things. So we never really got trained in those. But anyway, advanced was Fort Rucker. One thing we did at Fort Rucker, the first thing we did when we got there was we went down to Panama City and we rented a beach house because we'd get weekends off. And so a bunch of us rented a beach house. We'd go down there, and on the weekends, we would have like big fish boils and, we'd set the beach up. We'd take the doors off the house, put them on sawhorses, have a big fire going, and, invite all the girls on the beach or anybody passing by to, come to a party. And
that's awesome.
We drank cold duck in those days. You guys know what cold duck is?
Duck.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we drank cold duck. That was our drink. And I remember one time I said, okay, we're going to get stocked up on cold duck. So we went to the liquor store and said, we want all the cold duck you have. We didn't know how much they had. But you came out with a two-wheeler, loaded up the car, and we had cold duck all the time we were there. That was our favorite drink.
Nice.
Oh, my gosh. All right, so how long did advanced?
I think
from the time you started primary until the time you got, finished, got winged, how long was that?
How long was flight school?
Yeah.
It was 9 months total. And,
okay, wow, that's
it's just about half and half.
That seems kind of accelerated to me, Repeat. I don't know.
Yeah,
was that normal or was that accelerated, John?
That was just, I know that my daughter, I think, spent 1.5 years, 2 years in flight school.
Yeah. That seems more normal.
Yeah. So ours was pretty accelerated. There were, we had tactics at advanced flight school where we were flying with guys who had just come back from Vietnam and had done pretty much everything there was to do. And so they'd, teach us if you're going to do an insertion, this is how you do it. This is what you might face over here. This is how you deploy the aircraft and do all that stuff. That's kind of at the end of it. They were just teaching us how to do, fly helicopters in Vietnam. And
how not to get shot.
Yeah. And not really giving us the in-depth that I know Navy gives a pilot. They have to know all about how the aircraft operates and all that other stuff. We knew how to fly it and tactically sort of knew what to do.
Okay.
Sort of knew. Oh boy. Now, did you fly gunships or was it strictly slick?
It was slicks. You had a choice. We could have gone to it was Fort Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia, is where you get trained on guns. And then in the air cav, which I was in, we had 3 different kinds of aircraft. One was the Cobra, and the other was for scouts. They had the OH-1, I believe it was. It's a Hueys aircraft. We called it a Loach, a light observation helicopter, and that one didn't require a transition. You'd get your transition in country. And so if you were either going to fly slicks or guns going in, and then when you got there, they might assign you had to volunteer to fly Loaches. That was a pretty dangerous job. And so I flew slicks. I was happy to do that. And then even got a story about that a little bit, too.
Nice. Okay. Well, because that was going to be my next question. When you finished flight school, where did you go? Did you go right to Vietnam? Did you do to a stateside unit and then deploy, or how'd that work?
No. We went to flight school on orders to Vietnam. That was our permanent duty station. That's how we got the TDY. So your orders were to go to Saigon when you graduated. So you got a little leave. We had a party before we left. On the way out, this is to get on the airplane in San Francisco and go over there. We'd partied the night before, so I was kind of tired and fell asleep on the airplane. The stewardess woke me up and said, "Captain wants to see you." Okay. So I went up into the cockpit, and he said, "Sit over there." And this was the first officer, I don't know if they had a navigator or what it was, but anyway, sit over there in that chair. You had access to radios and everything. And his son was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And so he said, "I want to come up, talk to you a little bit, tell you about my son," and so on. And so we got to know each other a little. And then we got close to San Francisco, and he says, "Do you want to call into traffic here?" And I said, "Yes, sir." So he let me call into traffic in San Francisco. I didn't do it all the way down, but that was a lot of fun. And, kind of made me feel like, hey, this is going to be a big deal,
Yeah.
So you better get ready for this.
Yeah. Okay.
So San Francisco, and then from there, did they civilian transport you into Saigon, or was it on military transport?
Yeah, we landed at Tan Son Nhut, which was a big Air Force base. Okay. And from there, I went down to Cam Mau, which was where you got assigned your unit. So we didn't spend much time, maybe one night up in the Saigon area, and then went down to a place on the Mekong River, which was one of the, little larger cities there. And that's a little story, too, about how I got assigned to, what we did was there was a bunch of pilots there in sort of a Quonset hut type thing. And we were all standing around, and my friend Wayne and I went outside, smoke a cigarette or something like that. And he was the guy that had gone to A&M. And on the other end, an officer came in, and he had one of these Stetsons on, and like a yellow scarf, and he had spurs on his shoes, and obviously this guy
dressed like Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Perfect. He was Black Hawk 6, and he was going to tell everybody where they were, which unit they were assigned to, and so on. And so I was going to go in. I mean, here comes the boss, and I'm going to go in there. And Wayne said, no, just wait a minute. This guy looks like he might be a little trouble. Now, we were both first lieutenants at the time, and most of these guys were warrant officers. So we stayed outside, and he started talking to people. And almost the first thing he did is he started to try to sell loaches to them, to fly scouts.
Oh, shit.
And, this is the most exciting job and all this other stuff. Wayne said, just hold on. They always wanted commission officers to fly scouts if they could get them because they were a little older and maybe their judgment was a little better and so on. And it was a volunteer thing. And so he said, does anybody want to volunteer? And it was obvious he was looking for us. He was like looking for somebody who wasn't there. You could kind of tell, we could have a little bit of an eyeball on him. And so a couple guys raised their hand, volunteered. Okay, he had his scouts. Then we came in. We apologized, sir. We were, outside. We didn't know you were here. Okay, good. So we dodged the first bullet there. We wouldn't have. It would have been hard to say no to him. And we had both decided we just were going to be real happy with Hueys, and we really didn't want to fly scouts. I don't know if you guys knows what their missions were, but
I was going to get you to get into that for us.
Okay, well, the missions that we got assigned to the 7th, the 1st Air Cav in Vinlong. And we were basically assault helicopter. We weren't an assault helicopter company. That was a little bit different, but all we flew was combat assault. We didn't fly what they call ash and trash, where you deliver supplies anywhere. We didn't do any of that. Okay. So we had 3 aircraft, and we'd get intelligence the night before. We'd go to a particular place, and there'd be an infantry commander there. And he would, give us, we'd get a briefing at the commander's table in the morning, but we'd get another one from him. Okay, this is the situation on the ground. There's some bad guys over here. And we expect there's maybe 100, 150 of them, some kind of an estimate. And so we're going to get started. And what we'd do is our scouts would go out, and they'd fly kind of low and slow over the area that the enemy was supposed to be in. And they would find the enemy typically by being shot at. And then they'd make a couple of turns. Now, they were covered by Cobras. So when, the enemy shot at them, the Cobras now would be able to kind of find their target. Scouts would move around again, and, they're trying to find out, this is a big tree line. These guys are here to here. Okay. And they could get a pretty good picture of how many of them there were. If just a whole lot of fire came up, they'd just get out of there and say, bring in the troops, because there's too many of them for us. But a lot of times there were, 50, 100 guys. So anyway, then once we'd identified where they were and kind of, basically what kind of strength do these guys have? And now we would start bringing troops in. And we had 3, we'd come with 5 Hueys. One of them was going to be the mission commander. 3 of them were going to insert troops, and the other one was just going to be standby. So we'd start bringing troops in. We'd put 30 on the ground. Typically, 1 or 2 of them would get wounded. And so we'd chalk 3, would pick those guys up, take them to the hospital. We'd go back and get more. The extra helicopter now would, now we'd still have 3 because we had this extra one. We'd insert some more troops. Almost always had one going back and forth to the hospital because, the troops were assaulting a tree line and some of them would get wounded. And that's kind of what we did. Cobras were putting rockets in. And, if things were bigger, then I'll talk about that too. But that's kind of a typical day at the office.
Well, shit. How many combat troops could you haul in a Huey when you're doing those air inserts, assaults?
How many like missions? You mean?
No.
How many troopers? How many soldiers?
How many troopers in the back of your
10 each. We'd have 10 on each helicopter. Damn. We were mostly working with South Vietnamese. You couldn't take 10 Americans on one of these helicopters, but
Okay.
These guys only weighed 100, 120 pounds. They had 40 pounds on their back, and we could take 10 of them.
So was that the single engine Huey? Single turbine engine?
Single engine. We had H model Hueys, which were the best Hueys you could get in those days. Hueys came in A, B, C was a Charlie model. That was set up as, an attack helicopter. And then there was a D model, which was a pretty good Huey. But we had H models, which were more powerful, really great Huey.
Can I ask you, June of 68 is when you had to turn left or turn right. What year, when was it that you landed there in Tong Suit?
In where?
Tong Sanut.
Oh, Tong Sanut. That was September 15th, 1970.
Okay. Thank you.
Nice. All right. Hey, excuse me. I think now might be a good time to just take a moment and say thank you to our sponsor, and then come back and talk about. Seems to me you had some forced landings, and like to hear about
what
this.
Helicopters that have forced landings.
I can't believe it myself, but
John, I don't know that Repeat set this up for you or not, but he and I are both very deathly afraid of being on a helicopter.
Terrified.
Are you?
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, it's a whirling death machine waiting to crash at all times. Not only when people are shooting at you.
At least it's trying to tear itself apart.
I can appreciate that, but I'll tell you, the Huey could take a beating. And generally, we'll talk about some of those things, but I have a lot of confidence in the Huey. And I also flew the OH-58, which is a Bell Jet Ranger. Those are both pretty good helicopters, but I didn't want to fly Cobras because Cobras were a maintenance headache as far as I was concerned.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
So I can understand
let's listen to Robbie. We'll hear about Robbie Walling and HSI Wealth Strategies.
So there I was, staring at my retirement account, thinking, man, I should have talked to Robbie Walling at HSI Wealth Strategies about 20 years ago. Oh, I had a budget, a spreadsheet, a dream, but in reality, that's not enough, Fig.
Repeat. I've known Robbie for over a decade, and let me tell you, the guy's as solid as they come. In addition to HSI Wealth Strategies, he's an Air National Guard pilot. He's an aircraft commander in a C-130. He's sharp as a tack, and he gets us. Military and airline pilots aren't your average 9-to-5 crowd, and HSI isn't your average financial group.
Well, exactly. We're smart folks. Just ask us, right? I mean, we know how to plan a flight down to the minute. But planning a 30-year retirement, well, that's a whole different airspace there, man. And HSI knows how to navigate that.
On average, their clients end up with, get this, $1.5 million more than folks going it alone. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because HSI knows strategies that most of us were never taught. It's not about working harder. It's about working smarter. How many times have we heard that over our career, right?
And yet we insist on not doing it so much to ourselves, right? But here's the kicker. Look, right? It's not what you save. It's what you keep. Okay? Right? Boom. I mean, think about it. Between taxes and timing and the unexpected, because that never happens, you can lose altitude fast without the right plan. I wish I'd known that when I started out. But this is your chance to avoid the common pitfalls that you just don't think about without a solid financial planning background.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't fly a long-haul flight without a fuel plan, right? Yeah. I mean, you should know that. So why approach retirement that way? Because we're basically talking about kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
I talked to a guy, he's one of my peers, who has put money in all the right places, but had no idea that he was setting himself up for like a tax meltdown down the road. Smart guy. He just didn't have the right map.
Yeah, right. I mean, Uncle Sam has long fingers that reach way down into your pockets when you least expect it. Right. So let the professionals at HSI do what they do best so you can keep flying safely into retirement.
Yeah. Don't be a moron. Call Robbie. at 214-538-7030. That's 214-JET-7030.
Or email him, robert.walling@nm.com. That's robert.walling, WALLING, at novembermike.com. Look, don't wait until your final approach to start thinking about retirement. Do it now. Your future self will thank you.
Trust us. Don't be that guy.
Don't do it. Call Robbie.
So, there I was, thinking about the gift of flight and how powerful it could be if we shared it. Imagine helping a child reach the doctor who can save her life. Imagine being the reason a wounded veteran gets to the care he desperately needs. Imagine knowing that when disaster strikes, you have the power to deliver food, water, and hope when every second counts. Since 2010, PAL's Skyhope has provided over 35,000 free flights, each one a lifeline, and every single one flown by pilots who decided to step up and make a difference. Pilots just like you. If you have your IFR rating, 350 hours pilot in command in a single-engine aircraft, and access to a plane, you already have everything it takes to change lives. And even if you're still building time, you can step up as a co-pilot or mission assistant because every seat matters. It starts with one flight, one decision, one life changed forever. That's right. Learn more at palsflight.org or call 888-818-1231. That's 888-818-1231 and find out now how you can become part of something bigger. PAL's Skyhope, because when you lift others, you lift yourself. Whoop, fantastic. John, do you recall your first combat mission and how terrifying was that?
Well, the way it kind of struck me in the first several combat missions, I realized I thought people were shooting at me. And so that troubled me a little bit. And
hold on, that's a show title. I'm sorry, that troubled me a little bit.
Wait, hold on.
It troubled me in a kind of a strange way in that I sort of took it personally. And, it was a little bit depressing. These guys out here, I knew these guys, on the other side were young guys, like me. I thought we probably had a lot in common. And we'd probably like each other, if we could actually meet. But what I came to terms with when I first started flying is they aren't shooting at me. They're shooting at the helicopter. So I kind of put all that behind me. I just said, this is to whom it may concern. It's not me. They're shooting at the helicopter. And so I'm just going to do what we have to do, which is shoot back. Then after that, it was behind me. I didn't take it personally, and it was just a job we all had to do, both sides.
I actually have to jump in there and tell you just a super quick story. That one of the first combat veterans I met at OCS told us all as officer candidates, it isn't the bullet with your name on it you have to worry about. It's the ones addressed to whom it may be concerned. So you say...
Right.
Yeah, along that same line, when you're being shot at by tracers, it's only one of three.
Right. There's a lot more lead flying through the air.
In between. Oh, man. All
so,
right.
I'm gonna refrain from asking questions. I'm gonna let you go, then I'll come back.
Yeah, let's hear more.
Let me see. I know you and I talked about having combat damage sometimes.
Right.
Which you're bound to have happen. I had it. I was forced to land a few times. One time I got my throttle linkage shot out, and I really couldn't control the engine speed. I wasn't sure what was going to happen to the engine speed, so I felt like I should land the aircraft. And we were in air cav operation, so there were other helicopters around, and there were Cobras around and everything. We landed, and I landed in a place that I thought was safely away from trouble. And it was a kind of a muddy rice paddy. And so we set it down. We weren't too worried. I told, the flight that I need somebody to come over and pick us up. And I told the door gunner, I said, why don't you set up a machine gun and just aim it at that tree line over there. It was probably 1,500 feet away or so. So, I felt like we were pretty safe. And he said, if something happens, then you can start shooting at if there's a guy over there, you can shoot at him. And so we're waiting for the helicopter to come in, and a mortar round comes in, short of us. Blows mud all over the place. And so I just said to the guy, I said, throw your machine gun in the airplane and run that way about 50 meters. Everybody get out of here. And fortunately, we had a Cobra saw the round come in and put some rockets on that location. So they didn't get another mortar round off. But we did get out of there and get picked up, and everything was good. And we didn't lose the aircraft either. We were able to, I think they slung it out that night and, fixed it up. But that was one situation. Another one was, let me see. Yeah, we took some bullets in the fuel cell, and the whole place smelled like JP4. And I had one of them hit me in the heel. It didn't hurt me, but it was like the bullet was spinning on the metal plate there. And I wasn't sure if it was an incendiary or not. So I stamped it out, like you would a cigarette butt. Yeah. And I felt like I better land because I didn't know, you could get a spark or something could happen. So that one we landed and got away from pretty successfully. And third one I'll tell you about, we took a round. It was just a great shot by somebody. It pierced a hydraulic tube, just cut it right in half. And so when you
hydraulic line right in half?
Pardon me? Hydraulic line?
Hydraulic line right in half.
Yeah, we had tube. We had a hydraulic tube, just, I don't know, what is it, about a half inch or something. Bullet went right through it. And so we lost our hydraulics. And in a helicopter, I don't know what that's like in a jet or something, but in a helicopter, that's kind of a big problem. And I bet. Your collective, which enables you to go up and down, put power into the blades and pitch in the blades, will not go up anymore. So whatever altitude you have, that's what you have or less. And your cyclic, you don't want to move it much. And you can have what's called a hard over, where the cyclic just goes one direction and you can't bring it back. So it's really kind of a dangerous situation. And we were pretty close to enemy, a little too close to land right then and there. So I flew the aircraft and tried not to touch, do anything with the controls. I flew it real low and slow. I didn't know if this is the right thing to do because you could have one of these problems at any time once your hydraulics have failed. But I managed to just creep along and get behind the enemy and then make it back to the staging area. I put the aircraft down at the beginning of the staging area, got everybody off of it, and ground taxied it over to the grass. Shut it down. My crew chief, who was just an outstanding guy, had all the equipment aboard to fix this, including the hydraulic fluid. So I decided, my day is kind of over here. Maybe I'm just going to go up and get some sun. So I got on top of the helicopter. We had these two-piece Nomex flight suits. So I took my shirt off. I was going to get a little suntan. And a little while later, this kind of spit-shined aircraft came into where we were. And the crew chief said, I think this guy's looking for you. Okay. So I quick put my top on and my cap on. And I went out. He landed in the middle of the tarmac there, and I reported to him. And it turned out it was Delta 6, who commanded all the aviation assets in the Delta. And he's a great officer. He was out in the field a lot, and he'd been picking up on all the things that happened. Reported to him, he pinned an air medal on me, air medal for valor, and then he left. So that was kind of a big experience. It's called an impact award. And if it's given to you in the field, it's kind of a big deal. Hey, my only regret was, that picture is at a awards ceremony we had. And that's my call sign there, Apache 23.
Apache 23, there it is.
Okay.
But anyway,
okay. I figured out how to put a picture up, but
my regret about that whole thing is I wish I would have asked the Delta 6 to give a medal to my crew chief for being so well prepared, because we were back in the field that afternoon flying combat assaults again. Took the airplane home. So that's pretty good when your crew chief can do that kind of repairs.
Those guys are amazing. They really are.
Did you fly hard crews? Same people every time, most of the time?
I had my same crew chief and my same helicopter. Once, I'd been there a while. I was an aircraft commander, and we'd have a different door gunner, but we had the same crew chief. And another word about my crew chief, my helicopter could be equipped on any given day with a 50 cal on one side, M60 machine gun on the other side, or a minigun. This guy could rig a minigun and a 50 cal on a Huey. And I was the only one I knew who could fly with those kind of weapons, because just nobody else knew how to rig them and do all the other stuff. It's pretty cool in a Huey.
Yeah.
Right.
That is cool. I don't think I've ever seen a Huey with a 50 caliber door gun.
Yeah, he could put one up there and, put the ammunition on. It had a tray and all that to get it there. And he'd say, this is what we're going with today, sir. Great. And the 50 was really good for busting bunkers. If you had guys that bunkered up with 50, will do a job on that.
That was a fun gun to fire. I remember firing the 50 at TBS.
Yeah,
that was fun. You could feel the power of that round going. As it left the gun. It's like, damn, you do not want to be on the business end of this.
Well, another one, of course, this was on the Cobra, was the 20 Mike, the 20 millimeter.
Right.
I don't know if you guys have.
You're talking about the Gatling cannon, right?
Yeah.
Gatling. Yeah.
Yeah, the 20 millimeter on a Cobra was really a powerful weapon. It had so much torque to it that they had to almost go full left pedal to hold it on a target. It just was a tremendous weapon.
Okay. We're actually looking at trying to get the gent who has, I think, the most hours in a Cobra. He's at 6,000 hours in a Cobra.
Oh, my God, that's a lot of hours.
Yeah. So
that's a lot of hours.
That is a lot of guns to fly.
Yeah. Some of it is as a civilian flying museum pilot, but yeah, he was a Marine, and Jeff Moss, my leading edge, put us onto him. They're friends.
Okay, well, he's got a lot of stories, I'm sure.
I have a question I had to ask you, John. Daytime or nighttime missions? Mostly daytime.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll tell you about a couple nighttime missions. Mostly we flew in the day. The way we would work would be, we get an early wake up, depending on how far we had to go, 4:35 in the morning. Chow hall was always open for us. Anytime we flew, there'd be hot food, either when we came back or when we left. But so normal mission, you'd get down to the AO, the area of operation, maybe, 7:30 in the morning, meet with the infantry command, set everything up, fly, as long as it took. But right before 4:35 in the afternoon, we were going to knock off, because we get an aircraft shot down or something and it's going to get dark. We're going to have a lot of trouble dealing with that.
Sure.
So we didn't, those kinds of missions, we didn't want to be getting up against dark, as anything can happen. But we did fly. The other thing is, we did our own medevacing of our own troops, but troops get shot at night too, and they need to be medevaced. That was the job of Dust Off. Dust Off did that. And I really came to appreciate what they did. I had a good friend here who I met after Vietnam, but he was a Dust Off pilot. I got a mission one night because Dust Off was busy and they couldn't pull us. And this guy was going to die if he didn't get to the hospital that night. So I flew down there. It was in the Delta, and south of the Mekong and Kamau, or Yeah, Kamau. There was no electricity, so there was no light down there. Yeah. And there were no train features either to navigate off of. Great. So we had to, you know, it was just a big challenge just to find the place. Had to use NDBs, non-directional beacons, and fix them. But anyway, we found the site. The infantry, and, you know, it's challenging at night when you don't have terrain features or electricity or any light at all and operating off NDBs. The infantry had an NDB, but it was kind of weak. And, you know, you had to almost be on top of the site before you could get beacon passage. So in flight school, I'd been trained. I made friends with one of the instructors, and he showed me how to do a graveyard spiral. And so when I came up to the objective, you know, I was talking to the ground commander, and he says, "Okay, have you got my NDB?" "Yeah, I'm pretty close to it." I said, "Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do 3 spirals, and I'm going to land right on top of your guy." They had a guy on the ground with a flashlight, and they were still in contact with the enemy. They were on one side of this opening, and he was on the other. The friendlies were on the other. So came over it, and I told my pilot when we had beacon passage, I said, "I want you to turn on." We were traveling without lights. And I said, "I want you to turn on all the lights, not anti-collision light, the running lights. And then I want you to turn them off." So he turned them on, and tracer fire comes up. And he said, "Where are we going to land?" And I said, "In the middle of it, right down there." Okay. So we put it into, we're at 2,500 feet. This is how the maneuver goes. Put it into a 30-degree bank, and you're going to make 3 revolutions. The third one, you know, you're going to land on the objective. And so on the first one, all the tracer fire comes up, but we're not there anymore. You know, we put the lights on, turn them off, and now we're in a turn, 30-degree turn, 2,500 feet per minute descent. Come around to the objective again, turn the lights on again, turn them off. Bunch of fire comes up. And on the, you know, the third one, we roll out, and we're gonna land on this guy who's got a flashlight. And I didn't want to turn my landing light on because it was dark. But I mean, they
like a light magnet, isn't it?
Be kind of a beacon to shoot at. But eventually, I'm coming in on the guy, and I said, "Well, I don't want to land on him." You know, we told him, you know, "We're going to land right on top of you and get out of the way of skids if we screw up." But I had to hit the landing light. And the thing about this maneuver is you're going fast enough that you've got a lot of torque in when you hit the ground. Okay. Now, I told him, "I want that pack there. I want you to put him on that aircraft immediately when we hit the ground, because we're not going to be there long." Okay. And so landed there. Fortunately, didn't land on the guy with the flashlight. They had the wounded. They put him on. We still had probably 30 or 40 pounds of torque in this aircraft. It jumped off the ground, and I had to take a hard left turn because there was a machine gun right there. And if you've ever been close to a machine gun with all those tracers and stuff, it just is like a flood of light in front of me. Took a hard left turn, got my tail to the enemy, and zigzagged a little, but we still had so much power on, we were out of range just like that. You know, we were out of there. And I don't even think we took a hit on the whole thing. We just were able to get him out, take him to the hospital, and we didn't even talk about it after that. The chow hall was still open for us. We got some food, just went to bed. It was just very tiring.
Get out and get some sliders.
Yeah. So that was a night mission. And another one we flew, and this one was over a period of time, was in Cambodia. At the time, it was probably in 1971 when this took place, Phnom Penh, Cambodia was under siege. And so we needed to guide barges up the Mekong River from the Vietnamese border up to Phnom Penh. was about an hour flight, but it took, a lot longer with taking people up the river. And about halfway up was a city called Niklom, which was the ferry site. If you wanted to cross the Mekong between the Vietnamese border and Phnom Penh, there weren't any bridges. And the only way you could get across really is on a ferry. And so this is kind of an important place. And we would get attacked every time we took this thing up. It was usually about midnight or so, we left. And we'd get attacked. And we had infantry on the barges, and they'd shoot back and all this stuff. But it seemed like we were getting attacked, kind of in the same area each time. So Wayne and I, this fellow I've mentioned a couple of times, we had 2 helicopters and a couple of Cobras to execute this thing. We'd leapfrog our way up to Phnom Penh. And we sat down with the guys at the little base nearby, and we said, we think we know what's happening here. We think these guys have got a tributary that comes in, and they have these little boats on this tributary, and we think they're bunkered up on the shore. And so, they fire at us, they get in their bunkers, and we can't. All we've got is small arms, and we do have some RPGs, but you have to hit the bunker, solidly. And so I said, I think we need some TAC air. And we couldn't order TAC air ourselves, but these guys could. And so I said, why don't we do this? The next time we get a barge up, get us some TAC air with maybe 250-pound bombs and have them up high. We'll give them the coordinates, and we'll see if we can kind of end this thing. And so this is, another night mission. We're going up there, and sure enough, we get attacked. Well, we've got some TAC air up there, and I asked for some nape too, because I wanted to put some nape down on the tributary to burn their boats up so they couldn't escape. And so the guys come in, they drop their bombs, and did a good job. If you need a bomb put on a particular spot, call the Air Force, because those guys can do it. But
hey, hold on a second.
Anyway, they called us, and they said, and we've got a bonus for you. We brought Puff. So they had, you guys know who Puff was?
You talking about the AC?
Puff was a C-130 that had, Gatling guns on it.
Yeah.
And so
another terrifying machine you don't want to be on the business end of.
They put the nape strike in on the tributary, dropped the bombs on that area that they had the bunkers in, and then Puff batted cleanup on the area. And so we went up, we made it to Phnom Penh, and we did a few more missions, never got attacked again.
Weird.
Never got attacked, just went up the Mekong.
Great.
So Phnom Penh did not fall on my watch.
There you go.
Excellent work, sir. Excellent work. Good Lord.
Wow. Let's see. There were a couple others I wanted to ask about. I know. You also had to go help round up, I'm assuming it was NVA POWs that had escaped, but you talked about a prison camp break that you guys helped.
That's kind of a fun story. Like a lot of these stories have a lot to do with, bombs and all this other stuff. But this one, we got called to go to a place called Fuqua Island, which is about 35 miles off it was in the Gulf of Siam, about 35 miles off the coast of South Vietnam and near the Cambodian border there. And our mission was to go down there and round up some POWs who had escaped from this camp. And, this was an easy mission because they typically weren't armed, and these guys were running around on an island. And so what we did was loaded up some infantry, and we'd go find them and drop some infantry on the ground, and they'd pick them up and march them back. And it took maybe a day or a day and a half. And when we got done, we'd collected all the guys that got out. And when we got done, the village chief said, we want to throw a party for you guys, and we're going to have a luau. Okay. So I said, great. My guys are going to like that. We appreciate it very much. We were speaking, neither of us spoke each other's language, but we got by. So they had a pit dug, and I was sitting next to the chief, and village chief, we're talking, and they had like a rotisserie over here with some meat on it, like call them kebabs, kind of big kebabs.
All right.
And so we're talking, we're drinking some sake, and just having a good time. And I said, why don't you get me one of those kebabs off there? And he did. And I ate it. I had a little drumstick on it. Pulled that off. It was a little gamey, but not too bad. And I said, what is this? And he says, it's rat. He said, but it's country rat. It's not city rat. And so I ate it. It was not too bad. And I didn't tell the other guys what it was, But anyway, yeah, we had, it was a good time. It was a really fun time that night. But it was rat, but it was country rat.
Well, it makes it all better.
And so it's not eating nasty shit. It's probably eating
don't eat
natural
city
things. Yeah, city rat's probably not good ever.
Wow, oh, man! And you also did some operating with some of the special forces guys.
We did. Again, this is Wayne and I think we were down on this Cambodian mission, and we got a call, and there was a a special forces guy team that was having a problem. And there were some volcanic mountains in this area called the Nuijai, or the Seven Sisters, they also called them. And there were a lot of bad guys in these mountains because they'd come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they could pass an area between the Cambodian border and these mountains overnight. They could march through there and get into it. And so there were a lot of them there. Special forces had deployed into that area to, try to find these guys, locate them, and so on. And they found them, but they were kind of in a bad situation. And so we got a call and said, we're going to have to go extract these guys. And it was a rainy night. I think I went in first, and we had to land on the side of a mountain. And we're coming in, and there was so much tracer fire that I told my co-pilot, I'm going to just have to fly this thing by instruments, and you're going to have to tell me. We had a guy on the ground, laying on the ground, sending us Morse. And the good news about it is that U and D are just, it's 2 dots and a dash and 2 dots, okay? And so he didn't need to know. My co-pilot didn't know Morse too well. Okay. And I said, okay, I'm going to keep my eyes inside the cockpit, because if I look outside, my night vision will get destroyed. And so I'm just flying, trying to keep the airspeed and the altitude and everything on. And he's telling me go a little up or down, land at the objective. Put it right on the objective. It was raining. You couldn't see much. Special forces get on the aircraft, turned my tail to where all the fire was coming from, and just dove down the mountain. And we got out of there. Wayne got in and out too. I don't know if we got any damage or not, but we didn't get any emergencies out of it. And so it was kind of an interesting evening. We got them all out. Nobody got killed.
The amount of tracer fire was distracting, so he had to fly on instruments repeat.
Yeah. You can't, if you lose your night vision, you're not going to be able to do a good job on that mission. So I had to keep my eyes inside the cockpit.
Was your seat armor plated? Was there armor plating around the cockpit of the Huey?
Just the floor. We had what's called a chicken plate we put in. It was a ceramic plate. It could take 1 round, but then it would crack. So if you got a couple of rounds, you'd probably get, one of them would go through it. But it could, take a 30 caliber round. So we slide it in, we're coming into an LZ, and if we thought we needed a chicken plate, we'd just reach under the seat and slide this chicken plate in front, and then you'd have that kind of protection. Below us, we had gunmetal, And so a bullet could get through it, but it couldn't do much damage if it did. That's all the protection we had, though.
Jeez. Can't be very effective if you lose your night vision. Can't be very effective if you lose your blood either. So,
right.
Yeah. Well, then there's that. How long did your tour last?
1 year. 1 year.
And was that the standard for helicopter pilots, one year?
Well, it was for Army helicopter pilots when I was there. But I've been told by other guys who flew earlier in the 60s that they had longer tours. I know Marines had like a 15-hour or a 15-month tour, I think. I'm talking about Marine infantry. I don't know about aviators.
Yeah. I thought it was a year. Yeah, I don't know. Wasn't there, and and you did just the one tour?
Just one tour. Yeah, I was only really in the Army for 4 years. Went to all that training, flew over in Vietnam, and then I came back 1 year at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And then I wrote a letter to the Army and said, I've enjoyed serving and so on. But, I knew at the time, this is 71, this is actually 71 going into 72, that they were way overstocked with people like me. And my roommate, Wayne, who I've mentioned a couple of times, was a cattle rancher in Dalhart, Texas, and he wanted to get back on the ranch. So he wrote a letter to Department of the Army when he was in Vietnam, and he said, I need to get back to the ranch and so on. We had a 5-year obligation after flight school. And they set it up. They said, when you get off the plane in San Francisco, you're out of the Army. And so you could get out of the Army in those days. And I had written a letter when I was at Fort Carson, and I was commanding infantry at the time. And I had my infantry in the field, and we had tents, and all that kind of thing. And I was walking around the company area, and a guy comes in a Jeep, and he says, I'm looking for Captain Haugen. And I said, I'm Captain Haugen. He says, get in. You're out of the Army. And so I signed a couple of papers, and I was out of the Army.
Wow, that was that, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 900 hours in combat, and that's in 1 year. That's a lot of flying. That's a lot of flying. How many hours a day? How many hours a day average?
It all depended. The longest day I ever spent was 15 hours, and that was a big deal because we discovered way more people than we thought, and so we were having. Delta 6 had called me. He was in the air and said, "What do you need?" And I got TAC air. And I said, I need some black ponies. You guys familiar with black ponies? They're OB-10s that Navy OB-10s. We used to mark targets with those guys. And we had OB-10s marking targets. And we had TAC air dropping bombs. And they told me the next day there were like 2,000 people there that we were attacking. And we didn't know that at the time. We just knew that we couldn't have overwhelming force. We just couldn't bring the troops. And so that was the other thing that Delta 6 brought was a Assault Helicopter Company with 30 helicopters. And so we made the final insertion that we were part of with ours plus 30. So we're putting about 330 guys on the ground at that point. And then he said, take your men home. We'll take it from here. So it was dark at that time. And he put a nape strike in, too, on the place where the guys were, the bad guys were. That was, like a big fireworks display at night.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Nape come in.
Speaking of losing your night vision, huh?
Yeah. So, but he let us go, and those guys finished up inserting a few more troops. And I think we won that battle. He may have called in an arc light, too. You guys know what an arc light is? That's a B-52 strike. They came out of Utah, I think, and some other places. But occasionally that would happen. If we ran into a lot of guys, we'd report that. And then about 8 hours later, the B-52s would be dropping bombs on that area. There were a lot of holes in the ground when we came there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of steel coming out of the sky.
Yeah, it is. So, John, what was your, for lack of a better phrase, what was your closest call to not making it back?
Well, I had an experience. Okay, this is a mission that is going to sound crazy to you, but
because none of the others have.
Yeah, the Hueys Forest was a mangrove swamp that ran across the southern edge of Vietnam, bordered by the Gulf of Siam. And so they said, and it was infested with NBA. It was really almost kind of impenetrable because I don't know if you've been in a mangrove swamp, but there's roots all over the place, and it's a mess to even walk in. And this had 150-foot trees and all this kind of thing. So anyway, here's the mission. They said, we're going to send a C-130, and it's going to have a 5,000-pound bomb on it. And he's going to drop that, and it's going to make an LZ for you. And then we want you to insert troops in this LZ. And, presumably we've got the element of surprise, because we didn't ever get all the strategy and tactics and all this stuff. Like, why did you choose this place to drop the bombs, and whose idea was this anyway? But so they drop a 5,000-pound bomb. We're out there, three guys. All of us have 10 infantry aboard. And so we're going to land in this LZ. Well, the first thing that was wrong about it was these are hardwood trees. These aren't pine trees in here. If it had been pine trees, you'd blow them off at the base, and the LZ would probably be big enough. Well, these were like mahogany, ebony, teak, stuff like that. And that stuff shatters. It really doesn't. You don't just blow those things off their foundation. So the first helicopter comes in, and he has a blade strike. This is really very tight area. So now we've got a helicopter on the ground. He did get his infantry off. It wasn't like he had a super hard crash, but he had a blade strike, and the aircraft is now crashed on the ground. So he got his infantry out of there, but now we got 4 crew members on the ground. So we send a second helicopter in. It has a blade strike also, and it crashes on top of this helicopter. So now we got 8 members. We do have 20 infantry on the ground who, I don't know if all of them were still operational, but we do. And we've been discovered. And a war has broken out down there. So now we come in. And so we get down there now. We got to crush down on these helicopters. We got to get these infantry off. And they don't want to get off. They're, 5-10 feet in the air. And
go figure.
One of the problems is a lot of Vietnamese don't know how to swim. There's water there. It isn't very deep, but if you don't know how to swim, you don't want to jump off a helicopter into water. And so we did get these guys unloaded. The last one, I think the crew chief had to put a boot in his ass. I hated to see that happen because, he might get injured in the fall, but we needed him. But there's a war going on here. And so we've got the 8 guys that we have to extract here now start coming up. They're crawling up across these helicopters and getting into ours. Miraculously, the enemy hasn't decided to fire at us. I think it's because our infantry was giving them a pretty good battle, and, those guys are working. And we get our people aboard, and one of them was hurt, had to kind of litter them up. And so now we're going to have to go straight up out of this thing. You can't, you have to hover.
Sure.
And we hover up.
Forward flight to get additional lift, right? Which is,
in other words, you're going to be a stationary target for a while.
Yeah, we're going to be a stationary target, and we couldn't get above the trees. So we're up here, let's say 100 feet or something. We're up at some height. We're surrounded by trees. We can't go down. There's a war going on, and we're losing, okay? And so it's like, at that point, I had what I've later came to know as a third man experience. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I have not.
It's
not
something
pre-chat. I had not.
No, you can find it on Google. And I'd never heard of it. And so I'm in the cockpit. Now I'm the co-pilot in this, and it's like there's a presence or a consciousness in the cockpit with me, and it doesn't say anything, but it removes obstacles from you. You know, an obstacle in a helicopter is a tree. You don't want to fly through trees. And basically said, you can fly through these trees. And so, you know, I said, fly through the trees. It's the only way. We flew into the trees, and this was sort of treetops. So the branches weren't necessarily heavy. You wouldn't know that. Of course, you don't fly into a tree and know what to expect. 10 seconds, 15 seconds later, we hit a translational lift. We're out of the trees. 12 men survive. Fight another day. Story's not quite over. Our Cobras couldn't give us any support because of the kind of target they had there. We had friendlies on the ground, and there were bad guys next to them, and so you couldn't shoot rockets into that hole. So they were loaded. They still had full rocket load. And so we made our left turn, and we looked down in this hole, and they have won. They won the battle. They're up on these helicopters, and they launch NVA flag, okay, a North Vietnamese Army flag. Our Cobra guy, Walt, says, that dog won't hunt, okay? So he's looking down there.
Beautiful.
He sets up a run, and he salvos his rockets. Now, those helicopters probably had 1,000, 1,500 pounds of JP4 in them. Oh, he hits them, and it's end of job.
Boom.
So
that's huge.
That was something I'll never forget. And then I went probably 20 years without knowing about a third man experience. And then I read about it, and it's climbers, people climbing Mount Everest or other places, or solo sailors. If you're in a situation where it's absolutely hopeless and, it's live or die, you might have an experience like this. So I read about it 20 years later in a Army Aviation magazine, and I said, yeah, that's what happened there. But anyway, you can read about it.
It's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm glad that third man was there that
Showed
night
up
for you that day.
If he hadn't been there, you'd have probably had more lift. No. I hate to do this. I just got an alert that said you're not being recorded, John. So I think this is probably a good place to land the airplane, and we'll come back here momentarily and do your extra. Let's go ahead and land the airplane. And first of all, let me say you are welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you back and do this again.
I just looked at the clock.
The fun we've had. Yeah.
We've been at this an hour and almost an hour, 40 minutes. And oh my gosh, it went like, I thought we were talking like 25 minutes. John.
Yeah. John, I hope you'll consider coming back with us.
Well, John, I thank you first of all, thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your stories with us. These stories I never get tired of hearing everybody's stories.
Right. Fig, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into when we started this show, and the gravity of these stories, they've been amazing. And I just feel so privileged to be kind of the vessel that brings these stories forward. So we also need to say a couple quick thank yous to some other people, Dave Hamilton and Sadie over at Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. They handle our advertising. Thank you very much for all you do for us.
Thanks to Bago and Sticks, who's normally in the background doing some magic for us. I don't know. I don't think either one of them are here today, are they?
Sticks is here, but he's
silent.
With our new recording format, we're going to have to find another way to get him into the role. So, or Bago.
Well, thanks to Bago and Sticks.
Absolutely, they're huge.
Being the brains of the operation for us.
Yep. Thanks to Badass over at bdsaviationphotography.com for letting us use his amazing shots on so many shows. That guy isn't a photographer; he's an artiste. bdsaviationphotography.com.
Yeah, he really is. Really is an artist. Thanks to our advertisers who sponsored us today.
Absolutely. Robbie Walling, Robert.Walling at nm.com. Give him a call. Don't be a moron. Call Robbie. Do it now. And look, thank you so much to the Patreon pilots and the direct supporters who reach out and support us. I am going to take just a quick second here and look, because there it is, Nick Sokoli, who became a tanker aircraft commander yesterday, and his dad was a Vietnam era. I believe he said helicopter pilot. I don't have the email in front of me, but he unfortunately lost his pop just about 3 years ago, about the time this show started. And he says he loves listening to us, feels like he's talking to his dad's friends when he hears these stories. So, yeah. So we're deeply humbled by that. So thank you, Nick. And thank you, everybody who's lost all sense of financial responsibility and give money to us. Keep this show going.
Right.
Let's see. What else do we have? We got, hey, how about a 5-star rating, please? So there was.us/rate. Go on and give us 5 stars. Not 4, not 3.
Yeah. If you can't give us 5, tell us what we need to do to upgrade it to 5, because we're trainable.
Yeah.
For the most part. Right?
Send an email to Fig. It's fig@sothereiwas.us. Tell him
Repeat
why.
sothereiwas.us. If you want a really good answer to any question you have, send it to sticks@sothereiwas.us or bago@sothereiwas.us.
Exactly. Hey, it's coming up on bikini season. It's beautiful and warm down here in Florida. So go on over to sothereiwas.us/merch and get yourself a nice beach towel. Or, I don't know, what else could you wear on
bikini?
The beach? There you go.
Could wear a So There I Was bikini while you're laying on your So There I Was beach towel. That would be a great combo. It would almost be like camouflage.
Fantastic, yeah. And, we haven't mentioned it in a while. We've got a glossary, sothereiwas.us/glossary. In case we mentioned anything that you didn't get today, shoot us a note, and we'll get it up and into the glossary. And I think, it's really my ears.
That's really loud,
folks.
Well, that's the Dos Gringos that make the Air Force sound good. Air Force F-16 pilots, who, by the way, are going to be in concert June 7th in Denver at Flight Co. to raise money to bring an F-16 to the museum at the old Lowry Field. I don't know what it's called, but I'm going to try to go.
I'm going to try and make it myself. And there's also the Pima Air Museum is getting a VMA 231 Harrier on Friday, June 13th. What could go wrong, Fig?
What could go wrong with that operation? Friday, June 13th. Just saying. Yeah. Yep.
Flying a Harrier on Friday the 13th for its last flight ever.
No, I don't see anything bad coming from that.
No.
Nope.
Nothing could go wrong.
Nope. No. Ship shape. All good.
So, hey, until next week, everyone, stay safe and don't sit on the collective.
Don't sit on the collective.
Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
Hold on, it's what?
He said it's over.
Where the hell have you been, soldier?
Training, sir! Training!
What kind of training, son?
Army training, sir! Army training, sir!
Oh, boy.
Out.
Boom. All right.